to have one of our favorite guests, basically, because he represents right now our #1 international partner for CREO, our young adults program in Fusades. So Tom, it's a pleasure to have you in San Salvador. This would have been great via Zoom, obviously, but to have you here in person and for close to, I'm assuming it's like 35, 40 kids to be sitting, I know you're not kids, but we call you, we call every young adult in Fusades kids. But to have you here today, it means a lot to us, and for Tom to be able to meet you and for you to be able to pick Tom's brain in a challenging time for El Salvador, and to be able to learn about populism and the fight against populism, fighting against liberty, peace, and prosperity, and how we have to be able to become ambassadors for those ideas and how we have to defend those ideas, basically. So that's what we have Tom here for, and it's an honor to receive you in Fusades. It's great to have you in San Salvador, and thank goodness the pandemic is now letting us do these kinds of events, but please don't forget to not take your mask off, and if you need to go to the bathroom or anything, feel free to stand up and enjoy the show. Thank you for being here, Tom.
Thank you. All right, is my mic on? It is. Well, I'll take this off. I'm a safe distance from you. And it's such a pleasure to be with you. And just as you, nice to be able to see people. This is my first big trip since March of 2020. So I live in Thailand, and now I'm on a trip that will take me to 11 countries. So I was in Colombia, Guatemala, now happy to be in El Salvador, and Costa Rica, Panama, Spain, then Lithuania, Poland, Germany, then the US, then Germany, then back home to Thailand. And what I wanted to address you today on, in addition to apologizing for speaking a barbaric, terrible language, and not Spanish, I apologize for that, is populism, but understood as an ideology. Quite often, sociologists and political scientists look at populism as a response, like a reflex. If you hit my knee, my leg goes up, as if there's no ideas behind it. But in fact, populism is an ideology. And if we want to understand it, we have to understand the ideas and where they come from. So, if I can get this to, I'll just, oops. There we go. Start with a little bit on the origins of the principles of liberty. The presumption of liberty, that is to say, we don't want to live in a total state where the state can give us commands and orders. It is a presumption. You're free to live your life as you choose, unless there is a reason to stop you, like your action will be harmful to another person. But in the totalitarian state, in the authoritarian state, you must first ask permission. There's a presumption that the ruler, the state, can dictate to us how to live. But the free society starts with the presumption of liberty. It's very similar to law, where you have a presumption of innocence. If you are arrested by the police and the prosecutor says, you robbed the bank, they have to prove you did it. You do not have to prove you are innocent. It's not possible to prove a negative in so many cases. They have to show the proof you did it. And in the same way, it is presumed you are free to live your life. If someone is going to stop you, they have to show why. So the burden of proof is on them. And then the rule of law, the idea that laws govern us equally. It's not the case that what the ruler or the dictator or the president says, this is law. That's not law. Those are commands. So Hugo Chavez and Maduro and so many others, they say, my word is the law. It's not true. The law is how we live together with rules to govern our behavior. Think about traffic. You drive on the right side of the road. Where I live, we drive on the left side of the road. It doesn't matter so long as everyone follows the same rule, and not one rule for you and another rule for your neighbor. And those principles are under attack ideologically. The idea that you should be free to express your view now is under attack. You can be punished for having unpopular views in more and more places. And the main attack is coming from populism. So let's start by trying to define it, because it's something we see in a lot of countries. Mexico, AMLO, definitely populist. Maduro, but also in France, Marine Le Pen, a populist. In Hungary, Poland, in Brazil, in the United States, Donald Trump, I think, can be classified as a populist. He says, I don't need a constitution. I don't need a rule of law. I will solve all the problems. And he said, I am your voice. Sounded quite remarkably like Maduro in this regard. Well, thinking about defining it, a great political thinker, Isaiah Berlin, said, you know, if we have one formula to cover all of them, it will be too thin. He said, how can we talk about populism in Hungary, America, Mexico? What do they have in common? And he said, well, there's one core idea. And the idea is that the majority have been damaged, hurt by someone. They have been damaged by an elite, whether economic, political, or racial, some kind of secret or open enemy, capitalism, Jews, all of that. And whoever the enemy is, foreign or native, ethnic or social, does not matter. So the idea is there's the people and the enemy. And the enemy are sometimes hidden. They're secret. They're called La Casta. They're called the 1%, or the Jews, or some minority, or immigrants. So very much part of Trumpismo, the Trumpian populism was America against those immigrants. They're the enemy. So you identify the true people, and we are somehow attacked by an enemy who's all around us. Not a foreign enemy, but they're here, hidden among us. That's the core idea of populism. So Jan Werner Müller from Princeton University said the other point is that they are against pluralism. Pluralism is the idea that in a society we have a lot of different groups, ideas, religions. You have evangelical religions, Catholicism, Islam, Judaism. And similarly in society, we have some people who like motorcycles and some who don't. I'm sure there are motorcycle clubs in El Salvador. People love those, right? I don't. But we can live together with all of our differences. But for populism, there's no pluralism. We alone represent the true people. And the people is not made up of everybody. It's made up of the true people and then the enemies of the people. And this language, which we've heard more and more in politics, and Trump uses it all the time, the enemy of the people, which we identify. So when you say the people in normal language, you mean everybody. But populists don't mean everybody. They mean the true people. And then the other ones are the unpeople, the enemies of the people. We can identify them in various ways. Now, one of the most important theorists of populism is from Argentina, Ernesto Laclau. He calls himself a post-Marxist. He's a Peronist, so he's a fascist, and a Marxist. And he says this is now post-Marxism. because they think we've left behind Marx's ideas of class conflict to a new, higher level of conflict between the people and the unpeople. He talks about how populism creates what he calls a frontier of exclusion and divides society into two camps. The people is something less than the totality of the members of the community, a partial component which nevertheless aspires to be conceived as the only legitimate totality. So this is Laclau, one of the most important populist thinkers, and very important for the Chavista movement and Venezuela. For Podemos, most of these populist parties are inspired by Laclau's ideas. So that what you do is you cut society with a frontier between the true people and the enemy. His wife, Chantal Mouffe, very well-known political theorist also same ideas. She said, when we choose the enemy, we determine the sort of people we want to build. So think about that. They say, we build the people. Very different way of understanding the people. Normal ideas, we say the people are everyone who lived there, everyone in El Salvador, everyone in the United States, everyone in wherever, Japan. No. The populists say we create the people. And how do we create the people? We identify the enemy. When we identify the enemy, we build the true people. It's a very different way of thinking about the people. So here are some populist leaders. Nigel Farage, who was a leader of the Brexit movement in England, he said this will be a victory for real people. What did he mean by that? He meant the ones who voted on the other side, who lost, they did not only lose, they were not people. They're not real people. Real people supported him. That means the ones who did not are not real people. It's a very powerful statement of the populist idea. Donald Trump, the only important thing is the unification of the people, because the other people don't mean anything. So think about that. There's the people and the other people. They don't mean anything. They're not real. Now, Laclau, whose writing is extremely difficult on purpose, because he has very nasty ideas. He wants you to work to understand them. He said that what we need to do is to create popular identity through a signifier. It's a lot of linguistic philosophy, and in my opinion, basically nonsense. But what he's getting at is something very important. You create a populist movement by creating angry demands. And they don't have to make sense. They don't have to be logically coherent. You just gather them up. All the anger and all the rage in society, and you put it together. And then how do you make it one, with one unity? You have a leader. In his case, Juan Perón. Juan Perón became a signifier unifying and expanding popular camp. So the dictator, the great charismatic leader, for Laclau, Juan Perón. For the Trumpists, Donald Trump. For all the populist movements, there's one leader. So their theory is one true people with one will, one interest, and one leader. And it is the leader who creates the unity of all the anger, all the rage that is in society, brought together, unified by one leader to destroy the enemy, whoever they may be. And the choice of the enemy determines the kind of people they build. Recep Tayyip Erdogan from Turkey, also a populist. When he was speaking in the parliament, one opposition member asked the question. He said, "We are the people. Who are you?" You hear that? We. He. Erdogan. He said, "We are the people. You're nothing." And Hugo Chavez. You can find his speech on YouTube. It's one of the craziest speeches I've ever heard. Chavez is no longer me. Chavez is a people. And it goes on. Venezuelan woman, you are Chavez, right? Everyone is Chavez. Because Chavez is not me. Chavez is a people. Do you understand what he's doing there? I, Hugo Chavez, I am you. You are me. Whatever I want is what you want. If I want something, you want it. So this is a philosophy that leads directly to dictatorship. But it is stated in the name of the people. But remember, the people have a very different meaning from the way we use it every day. It's a completely different ideology. Now, this idea of the unity of the people have one will and one leader who creates, gives voice to the will of the people. But this is simply false. It's a false statement. The people of El Salvador are complex. No one of you is the same as all of the others. Each one of us has our own interests, our dreams, our desires. And that's true of groups in society. There are different churches. One goes to this church, another goes to that church. But we can still live together in society. We don't all have to go to the same church. We don't all have to have the same ideas and interests and dreams. Now, there are a few cases when there's national survival. If you're under attack, we do unify. We do that to avoid the aggression from the outside. But this is what populists want all the time. They want us to have that feeling constantly. We are under attack, and we must defend ourselves by having one leader. In contrast, liberal democracy, it allows us to live together without having to have only one view and one leader. You have political pluralism, different political parties. You have religious pluralism. You have all kinds of pluralisms, different forms of life. And liberal democracy allows us to live together and each to seek his own or her own happiness. Now, there's another thing that populism destroys. And Kellyanne Conway, who's the spokesperson for President Trump, put it very neatly. They were caught lying about something. And the evidence was clear. They lied. It was a small thing. How many people came to Trump's inauguration? Who cares? But they said it was the biggest in all of history. It wasn't. So they lied. And here's what she said. Our press secretary gave alternative facts. That's a beautiful word for lies. It means there's no difference between truth and false. If you say that I'm holding up 5 fingers, how many fingers am I holding up? 5, right? No, I'm not. I'm holding up 4. These are 4 fingers. It's just an alternative fact. Well, it's another word for a lie. They destroy the distinction between truth and lies. And they feed lies to people. And when people show it, they say, no, you have your facts and we have our facts. It's a really fundamental attack on reason as well. We also see that the independent media, anyone who calls them out and checks them, is the enemy. the enemy of the people. Donald Trump, fake news, this is NBC and so on, the enemy of the people. Don't believe them. They're lying. Only believe me. I have the truth you need, the people's truth. Now, there is fake news, and we should be aware of it. I'll give you a simple example. abcnews.com.co is not the same as abcnews.com. This one was a Russian front. It looked exactly like ABC News, but it wasn't. So there is real fake news. We have to be careful about these things. Here are just a few others. If you ever have gone to Denver, Colorado, has anyone been there? No? Okay. There's no Denver Guardian newspaper. But if you go online and you're not from Denver, you don't know that. So you think, oh, it's a newspaper from Denver, Colorado. It was just a website full of nonsense and lies. So these things do exist. We should be very careful about them. We don't want to suppress them. Thomas Jefferson pointed out, he said, we need to have newspapers and media. So attempting to suppress fake news with censorship is a mistake. But let's be aware of how that works. And in particular, one of the most powerful in the world is the Kremlin. It used to be called Russia Today. Now it's just RT. They have RT Español also. They're quite prolific around the world. And this is, I think, what we call disinformation. A lot of truth, and every once in a while, a lie to make you support whatever this man wants. All of them are run by him. And they repeat his vision. Peter Pomerantsev from Russia and England pointed out that the Kremlin is using this, and they support populists everywhere, by the way. Wherever you find populism, you find the Kremlin feeding it a bit, because they want to disrupt and destroy liberal democracies. That is fundamentally Mr. Putin's aim. They work with the far left. They work with the far right. Anyone who wants to destroy liberal democracy. Now, I want to go back, though, to the sociological approach for just a moment to populism. I've talked about the ideology of populism, but there are some things that trigger it. And Karen Stenner, who's a very, very good empirical political psychologist, has looked at the ways in which people feel a threat. And when they feel a threat to their identity, they move towards populism. And one of them has to do with lots of immigration. When it reaches a certain level, it does seem to trigger a view that we're under threat. And that's been increasing in much of the world because of various crises. So this is quite a powerful book. If you're interested in political psychology, I highly recommend Karen Stenner's book. But let's go back to the ideology. The next step in populism is no more talk. We've had enough talk. Action. Very much in the Chavez, Maduro style. But we also see it on the right-wing populists. So Viktor Orban from Hungary, he said, we don't need any more debate. We know what to do. We know what we need to do. What we need are 30 robust lads, that's 30 strong young men, who start working to implement what we all know needs to be done. No more talk. No parliament, no debate. Do it. And of course, do what the leader tells us to do. So this is this language of the time now for action. In addition, Orban said what we're going to do now is build a state on illiberal, anti-liberal, and national foundations within Europe. So he wants to reject liberalism and democracy clearly, but to do it within Europe, which means he gets money from the European Union. I hope soon they will either expel Hungary from the European Union because of their extraordinary populism, or the Hungarians will finally reject him. Lastly, trade is zero-sum. Populists are almost always protectionists. They see trade as cheating us. And Donald Trump articulated this very well. We see populists now all over the world. On both the far right, Timbro Foundation of Sweden has been looking at right-wing populist parties. And don't think of them in terms of conservatives. They're not. These are ideological populists on the right, but then also on the left, coming back as well. These are just within the context of Europe, but we've seen this also in some Latin American countries as well. And again, Mexico is quite a warning to us. They are gaining ground. And some of these ideas are ones that we thought had died in 1945. So 1945, when fascism and National Socialism or Nazism were defeated, a lot of people said, okay, that's done. But these ideas are back. So let's start with Russia, which is quite important. At the end of Soviet Union, this man, Alexander Dugin, started a new political party called the National Bolshevik Party, which was intended to unify the ideas, and I'm not kidding, of Stalin and Hitler. He said, now we'll have a really strong ideology of power with communism and Nazism together. Of course, they have a lot in common. Here he is with a man you probably don't recognize. This is him now, Alexander Dugin. This is a man named David Duke. How many of you ever heard of a white supremacist group called the Ku Klux Klan in America, KKK? Anyone heard of that? They're the ones who murdered black people. He's the leader of it. And he, again, says this view, in his view, America is a white country. We don't need brown people and black people. The true people for him are white people. And the others, they're the enemy. If they're coming from Central America, if they're from Asia, if they're from Africa, the enemy. So this concept is very strong. Dugin is extremely influential in parts of Europe. He organizes militias to invade Ukraine, which is struggling to be liberal democracy. He is a very intelligent ideologue. And the core idea that he and the other populists, including Laclau, who's quite close to him also, comes from this man, Carl Schmitt. He was a National Socialist, a Nazi, very proud Nazi, and also highly intelligent. So it's a mistake to think fascists are just all stupid and primitive people. The leaders of these parties were very intelligent people. This book, I think, is the smartest attack on my beliefs that I've ever read. The concept of the political. You can get it in Spanish or English easily, I'm sure. And he says, what distinguishes politics is the difference between the friend and the enemy. In German, Freund und Feind. The friend and the enemy. And he says, not the enemy is not your neighbor whose dog is barking at night. That's not the enemy. The enemy is the one who represents a threat to you, and you are willing to kill the enemy. For Schmitt, the enemy was the Jews. He was a very committed Nazi. But the framework, it can be anyone. It can be the Catholics, or the Protestants, or the black, or the white, or the brown, whoever, it doesn't matter. The framework he set up is a framework for hating and destroying the enemy. And he says that is what makes politics. His friend Martin Heidegger, some of you may know him, one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century to this day, he said, we have the advantage that the question of who we ourselves are is timely, as distinguished from liberalism, the I time. He said, now is the we time of we, the collectivism, like communism, fascism, and Nazism. So these ideas have become very prominent on both far left and far right, and they're merging in many ways against the free society. So Slavoj Žižek is a very prominent communist in Europe, Marxist thinker. He says a leftist insists on the unconditional primacy of the inherent antagonism, that is to say, hatred and opposition in society. That's what they want. They live for this. They want people to hate their neighbors. That is the key to their ideology. He's a left-wing populist, but the right-wing populists have the same view. The white identitarian movements also say the same thing. What we want is a safe space for whites to keep out brown people and black people. It's the same populist mentality with a racial element. And then again, to go back to this idea, no more talk, Donald Trump. The time for empty talk is over. Now arrives the hour of action. This is the recipe for dictatorship. No more talk, no more conversation, no more debate, no discussion. We are going to act. Well, F.A. Hayek, whom I hope you know, a great thinker, a great defender of freedom against communism, against fascism, in this book, The Road to Serfdom, I think is a very powerful book. He warned us. He said, when you have the demand for quick and determined action, and people are not satisfied with democratic processes, then the man of the party who seems strong and resolute enough to get things done will seize power. We need to insist on let's keep talking. Let's have democratic debate. The Parliament or the Congress should have hearings and debates. Let's hear the other side, not only one voice. But when people say, enough talk, act like AMLO does, do it, you know this person is a dictator. That is where they are leading your society. Now, this authoritarian populism thrives on hatred. You hate the enemy, which is your neighbor. You should hate them. That's what the populists want. And I would put on the other side a hero of mine, one of the great figures of the 20th century, the second winner of the Nobel Prize to die in prison. He died in Chinese prison. Liu Xiaobo. And he talked about enemy mentality. If you want to read his speech, he got the Nobel Prize. You go to the Nobel website, you can find his speech. It's very powerful and very moving. He said, when they sentenced him to prison, he said, I don't hate you. I don't hate the judge. I don't hate the prosecutor. I don't hate the judges. I don't want to have enemies. I know you are doing what you do because you are afraid. And he said this enemy mentality poisons a nation, destroys our tolerance. He says, that is why I hope to be able to transcend my personal experiences, to counter the regime's hostility with goodwill, and to dispel hatred with love. And that's hard to do, especially when the regime has crushed you and sent you and your wife to prison. But he said, I don't want to give in to the hate. And hatred fuels dictatorship, and we should reject it. So one thing we should promote is what liberalism, true classical liberalism, promotes. This man, another hero of mine, Joaquim Nabuco from Brazil. Brazil was the last country in the Western Hemisphere to eliminate slavery. Last one. He spent his whole life working for this from the age of 18 until he was old. fighting to destroy slavery and to give freedom to all the Brazilians, black, white, and everything else. He said, what we need to do is educate your children and yourselves in the love for the freedom of others. It's only when we love the freedom of other people we really appreciate our own freedom. To me, that's really the key message of the idea of a free society. To love my freedom, but to love the freedom of my neighbors also. To love the freedom of people who are not like me. They might be different religion, different group, different language, different color, but I should love their freedom as well. That, if we can maintain that, will keep societies free and protect us from the dictators, whether they're left-wing or right-wing, who want to make us hate each other so they can seize total and absolute power. So this way, I think populism is one of the great foes, one of the great threats to free societies, societies where we can live together in peace. I hope I've given you a flavor of the ideology of populism, so that when we see people calling on us to hate other people, we will recognize what they're doing, and we can resist it and say we don't want to give in to hatred and the mentality of the enemy. With that, I thank you for your attention. I know it's Saturday morning, and I'm so impressed, and I hope we have a chance for some conversation. Thank you so much. No problem to ask in Spanish, because someone will translate for me. Do you recognize in your own society sometimes hearing this mentality of hating the enemy, of seeing them as people you cannot live with? Is this a common feature in El Salvador? I know it's very much in the United States today, and it scares me. It really, really scares me.
Us against them.
Sorry?
Us against them.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
mentality.
But us are the real people against the enemies. And this mentality, it is very powerful in the U.S., and I find it very frightening. But it's also we see it in other countries, Mexico, such a powerful example. And what's interesting, AMLO and Trump, enemies, but they were best friends. Best friends. Because every time AMLO would attack the United States, and Trump would attack Mexico, it made both of them more powerful. It fed the anger and hatred. And that gives these leaders more power when their people are filled with the propaganda of hatred. So AMLO and Trump, like this. Even though officially enemies, they were the best ally of each other.
Sí, hay como una variante, podría decirse, o algo que se repite en cada persona que llega al poder mediante el populismo. No sé si hay como una variante o algo que se repite.
And the answer is yes. I mentioned Laclau, and he created a playbook. And by the way, with support and close connection with the Venezuelan state. So as we know, we have watched what happened in Venezuela. It just hurts over years to see one of the richest countries in Latin America collapse into complete poverty, except for the ruling elite, the oligarchs. The Bolivarista oligarchs, they're very rich because they've been just looting the society. But the rest of Venezuelan society is plunged into horrific poverty. And they created a playbook. One thing you do, get into power, and then when you have for some reason or another, you win enough power, change the constitution. That's the first thing, change the constitution. Viktor Orban on the right-wing populist, he did this in Hungary. You eliminate the checks and balances of having an executive and a Congress and a judicial power that can check each one, that can control the other. Get rid of it. They did this. One way they do it is they create new sources of authority, like the Constituent Assembly in Venezuela. It's a new thing for the people. But then they make it clear the opposition can't run. So you have an election, but it's totally phony. Only one party is running. In this case, it was the party of Maduro, but in the case of Hungary, the Fidesz party of Orban. And this is a real playbook. Get power, change the constitution. Then eliminate restraints on the ability of the president to be reelected. So many countries limit 1 or 2 terms. They hate that. Get rid of it. Correa tried this in Ecuador. Correa also came from the same movement, the same ideas. But fortunately, I'm very happy about what happened in Ecuador. Correa also said, I'm the people and I are one. We destroy our enemies, etc., etc., etc. He was really wrecking the country. And then he said, and now we change the constitution, I can be in power forever. And his own party looked over and they saw Venezuela. They said, maybe not. And his vice president, Lenin Moreno, you hear the name Lenin, right? He came from an old communist family. But he's not crazy. He said, we don't want to end up like Venezuela, where people have to get food out of trash cans. And to his credit, Lenin Moreno said, no, no. And he was able to stop Correa. If he had not, Venezuela would be like, Ecuador would be like Venezuela today. But fortunately, they had the example of Venezuela to look at it and say, no, we're not going to do that. And now they have, I think the new president of Ecuador, Guillermo Lasso, is a really quite important figure. He wants to lead back to a society where people can disagree, they can debate, they can have different ways of life, have a normal free society. I'm very impressed by what he has done. And the groups like Fusades that were there, Ecuador Libre and other groups, they helped to save the country. Because Ecuador would have gone the route of Venezuela. And we know now the largest refugee problem ever on the continent of South America is Venezuela. It's horrifying. It's never happened before in South America. It's one of the biggest in the world, even when you think about Syria and other places, is Venezuela. Venezuelans living in Ecuador, in Peru, in Brazil, just escaping the horror and the poverty, lack of medical care, people dying because they don't have salt water for the hospitals, no electricity in the hospitals. We could go down a long list. But that's the playbook. Get power, change the Constitution, eliminate the separation of powers, destroy the independent judiciary. This is very important. Destroy the judiciary. All of the judges will be party members. All of them will be loyal to the leader, and they will follow what the leader says. And then take control of the media. Again, Venezuela is a good example. They shut down all the private broadcasting, shut down the newspapers. How do they do it? Oh my gosh, we discovered your broadcasting company has tax problems. It's easy to create in the Ministry of Finance. Phony, false tax claims. And then they come and say, well, we have to take it from you, and the next day it belongs to either the state or the best friend of the leader now owns it. In Hungary's case, Orban did this to all of the major newspapers, radio, television, took over everything, and they belonged to his best friends from his village, who turned out to be really brilliant business people. They're all getting money from corruption and from the state. So there is a playbook, and it's very well worth studying how this is done. But as I pointed out, for Laclau and for Schmidt, each one has their own view of who the enemy is, but the pattern, the framework is the same. You just pick the enemy you want. For the Nazis, it was the Jews. For Podemos in Spain, it's La Casta. And Inigo Errejón, the leader and founder of Podemos, when he was interviewed, someone said, "What does La Casta mean?" He said, "That's the beauty. You can't define it. It's whatever I want it to mean." You understand? He said it has the greatest performative capacity. It's whatever I want it to be. But I can make people angry against this enemy. That's a great, great, insightful question.
Your answer was terrifying, Tom. Because we already have checked like 4 out of the 5 boxes.
I understand.
¿Cuáles son como las consecuencias más comunes económicas del populismo?
I even understood that. Just a minute. Well, one of the consequences, just make sure I understood, what are the economic consequences, more or less, of populism? Okay, there we go. Lucky guess. Well, one thing is they tend to steal. Let's just be honest. They will take companies and put them into the hands of the ruler and the party. And not always one person. One person is the voice, but that person has many supporters in their group, like the Bolivarian movement in Venezuela. Thousands and thousands of people. The top ones become very rich, and the local enforcers still get a motorcycle and a gun and some money. But they tend to go and destroy enterprises and businesses. And one of the consequences is no one invests in those countries anymore. Because if you start a business and you're successful, it's not your business anymore. So one of the early pioneers of this was Vladimir Putin, and he has basically turned about 70% of the Russian economy into the hands of the state or close connected cronies of the state. So you end up with state companies that are being run for private profit. So Vladimir Yakunin, for example, was the head of the Russian state railway administration, running the trains that are state train system. So he's a government employee, right? And okay, they pay well, but when he retired, he had about $2.5 billion. Not bad, right? So think about that. You work for the government for 8 years, and then you retire. Surprise, $2.5 billion. What they did was they take these state companies and they run them for the private profit of the friends of the president or prime minister or whoever has all of this power. The consequence of this is it's not old-fashioned Soviet communism, which was quite destructive and inefficient and poor. It's a kind of modern crony socialism, crony capitalism, but the consequence is you enrich this top group of society. In Venezuela, they call them the boligarchs, Bolivarian oligarchs. But the whole economy spirals down. And the living standards of normal people tend to go down. Investment goes down. Capital is escaping from the country. If you have money, you want to take it out, put it someplace else, send it to a bank account in another country, and you end up with a much less competitive, more cronyist economy, and the economic consequences is living standards tend to fall for normal, everyday people. They go up for the very close friends of the president, of course. If you want to see something as an evidence of that, very embarrassing to Maduro, look up Salt Bae, B-A-E, Maduro on YouTube. Well, the Venezuelan people are hungry, really hungry in many cases, and flooding out of the country. If you're pregnant with a baby, you do not want to have the baby in Venezuela. So really, it's been awful in Colombia and so on. They have pregnant mothers coming to the border. They say, there's no medicine, nothing in Venezuela if I want to have the baby safely. And the Colombians, it's very hard, but they say, okay, come in. How can you turn her away? So for them, it's a disaster. But for the very top, life is good. The overall consequence is the destruction of the standards of well-being of normal people. And we see this over and over and over. And it doesn't matter whether, again, they're the right-wing populists or the left-wing populists. It's the same playbook every time. And here's the final point. At some point, some people begin to understand. They say, wait a minute. They keep saying they are the people, but I'm hungry and they're not. Something is wrong with this. But usually it takes some years for that to become evident. If there were an election today in Venezuela, I think they would sweep away these people, and that's why there won't be an election.
And how could we, as young people, contribute to defend our freedom against populism?
Súper buena pregunta.
Yes, a question even harder than these others. These are hard questions. This one's the toughest one. And I think one thing is to listen to Liu Xiaobo. So let me go back to that. I recommend reading his, on the Nobel website, Nobel Prize website, read his speech. I cannot do it without crying, because it's a speech to his wife. She had been in prison also with him, very brave lady. They had stood up against Chinese Communist Party for years and were punished repeatedly. And he says, not only I don't want to give in to hatred. He said to his wife, last time he saw her, said, if they crush me to dust and ashes, I will embrace you with the ashes. So those are his last words to his wife, that even if they destroy me, I will still love you. And he wanted also to express that he didn't hate the people who were doing this. And that's really important, because if you can overcome these regimes, we have to not hate them. And that's hard. It's really hard. But to not hate other people is one of the hardest things there is. So when political groups fight, okay, they have conflicts in politics, but don't hate each other. Say, we can live together, right? I don't have to hate you. The other thing is to stand up for rules against violence. We want to live by rules that are applicable to everyone. And it's very important to follow them in politics and not, as we say, cut the corner. Let's do this quickly. Do it correctly. And that means judicial procedures and live with what the judiciary comes out. So we saw in the United States, very controversial, a young man who was put on trial for shooting some people in Kenosha, Wisconsin. We have to recognize that was a case about this person. And when the jury gave its answer, that's the answer. Not burn down the society if you don't like it. Let the judicial procedure work and work fairly. And similarly with politics. Even if we lose, we lost by the rules, we will continue to work next time for our party, but we lost this time. We lost. But next time, maybe we will win. And it requires a mentality of toleration. And that means this is what Donald Trump can't do. In some ways, he's like a giant baby. He can't lose, but he did. He lost an election, right? But he is determined to say no. He says, I am the president. Kind of crazy. But the consequence is he's not willing to lose. And in a free society, you have to be willing to lose gracefully and say, okay, but we're going to come back. I still think my ideas are right. Next election, I will convince the people. And not say, I refuse, and I'm going to destroy the whole society to keep this power. And I pick on Trump. He's not the only one. There's also left-wing people in America who have the same mentality. So to promote a neighborly feeling, we are citizens together. I'm not an El Salvadoran, but let's say I am. I would say, I'm a fellow citizen of El Salvador with you. We have that in common. Let's just find a way to live together. It means also we should limit the power of the state. This is very important. A liberal democracy has to have limited government. Now, we can debate where the line is, here or here or here. But all philosophies, like AMLO's, that say unlimited state, they all destroy democracy. There has to be some limits. And then democratically we can debate where they are. But you have to have a core. The government cannot solve all of our problems. It has to be limited in its authority and insist on that. And so then finally, do the work you're doing with Creo. I think it's really important. And it means going out and talking to fellow citizens and saying we want to have an opportunity society. Last point, I'm talking a lot, last point, I think is really important. And that is to promote a society of inclusion. Everybody. And we know this region also has a history of cronyism, right? Of the 14 big families, all that, right? We know that. They have it in lots of countries. That there's the top and the excluded, who don't have property rights, who don't have protection of their property, who don't get monopolies, and so on. And we need to say what we want is a society where everybody, even the most humble, poor farmer, is an equal citizen, has the same rights. There are no special restrictions, no cronyism, no favors, no monopolies. Everybody gets to compete in the society. The left, the far left, has used this language. But they don't mean it, just to be honest. You end up with Chavismo. That's not inclusive, that's exclusive. The rich, Bolivarians, and everyone else. What we want to do is to be serious about that. We want real inclusion for everybody. And it doesn't matter how poor you are, where you come from, your language, indigenous, Spanish-speaking, whatever, everyone is included.
Well, actually, my question was kind of similar, but I wanted to add that we already have kind of a dictator, that's our president, of course, and the situation sometimes gets really scared for our democracy and freedom. So what can we do right now that we are already in this situation?
always remember in such situations, it could be worse, right? Could be worse. We're having a conversation now and there's no police dragging us out. This wouldn't happen so easily in Venezuela, where red-shirted goons come and beat you up, or in lots of other countries. So it could be worse. You want to protect the freedoms that you do have, and then push back against them. That is to say, expand them by defending the rule of law. In my opinion, the executive power in most countries is the most dangerous, just to be honest. Because once they seize power and they say, I'm the head of the army, and I'm the president of the nation, etc., they're much more dangerous usually than a Congress or a parliament. So as a general rule, I prefer parliamentary to executive political systems as an advocate of liberal democracy. But that's the one you have now. But the presidency and the executive has to be very strictly controlled and to promote the Congress and the judiciary and the free press, not a part of government, but an important part of the governing system, to defend their prerogatives against the encroachment by the executive. And to do so always in the name of the Constitution and of the law. So when executive authorities or presidents overstep their powers, they need to be told, you're not exercising the law, you're breaking it. We are defending the law in our Constitution. It's not a recipe for perfect success, but I think it's the ingredients of success. Does that make sense? These are the ingredients of a successful pushback against that. But we do know that there is also a kind of global, illiberal, populist movement that support each other. And the Venezuelan government has been very active in this, and, big surprise, the Cuban government also, exploiting divisions within democratic societies to make them hate each other and then to support whoever will be the leader to come out that will be friendly to them. They failed in Ecuador, and we should learn from that and see what happened there. So I would recommend connecting with Ecuadorian friends and say, how did you do it? What were the ingredients of this success? One thing I will mention, when I was in Ecuador a couple years ago, before Lasso was elected, and I was in the Congress, and the liberal opposition, who were in minority at the time, the free market groups, they said, we have an arrangement with 1/2 of Correa's party, the smart ones. We propose movements, changes in the law that will make the economy more open and will strengthen the judicial system and the legal system, and the communist press attacks us. Okay, we can live with that. But then 1/2 of the ruling party will vote with us. The other half are just lost. They're communist ideologues. But 1/2 of them would quietly vote with the free market liberal opposition. And they got through a lot of reforms. And then Moreno would say, okay, I have to sign this, the Congress put it through. But he also he was smart, he knew these were necessary. So sometimes it means reaching into the party of the other side and say, look, you understand where this is going to go, and work with them as well. And connected to this point, it's hard to do that if you have a mentality of hatred toward them. You need to reach out to those even in that political party and say, look, let's think about the future of our country together and get them to move over and work with you. So I wish I knew the answer. I don't. But I think I know some of the ingredients in the answer.
We have 2 more questions
Okay.
here, and then there's a question via Zoom, and I think that'll have to be it.
Happy, okay.
I apologize for my question, but I really want to know if in some point we can get something good from this kind of movements?
From populist movements.
Yes.
These have been tough questions, Tom.
Yeah, no, this is quite an alert, especially for Saturday morning, because I understand what Friday night is like in San Salvador. My hotel, the party stopped at about midnight. In their initial phases, there's the kind of life cycle of a populist regime. And in the initial phases, they do energize a lot of people to ask questions and sometimes to challenge truly predatory elites. And I think that can be positive. The problem is they just substitute new predatory elites for the old ones. The long run of this is more predation, more cronyism. And we've seen the evidence of that quite strongly. But the initial phase of talking about sometimes predatory elites I think, has a healthy element to it. But when all you do is substitute our friends for their friends, it doesn't end well. And now that you've defined your friends as the only authentic people in the country, it actually makes it worse. But I do think that that early phase has some beneficial elements. But when the life cycle of a populist regime that gets into power, when it continues, it ends up being worse, almost invariably worse than what you had at the beginning. That's a very interesting, I'm going to keep thinking about this. That's an interesting question.
Good morning. ¿Cómo podemos darnos cuenta que una persona usa el populismo aunque se muestre completamente diferente? O sea, leer esas red flags.
How can she identify red flags in populist leaders who pretend not to be populist leaders?
Can you repeat that louder for me, please?
How can she identify red flags in populist leaders who pretend not to be populist leaders?
Wow. Wow, these are really hard questions. I appreciate this. This is very good for me. Sometimes they use other language. So to take an example, you can talk about the people, but there's another one, patriotism. And patriotism is one of these words that can be used in many different ways. I like to think of myself as a patriot. I love the country. You have loyalty to the Constitution. But they have a different view. To me, true patriotism is to be loyal to the country and the law. Not whatever the dictator says, but the law. But they use the term patriotism to mean loyalty to them. It's different. But quite often this word patriotic will be used in this way. The other one, there's a code word that we find left-wing and right-wing, anti-globalism. And you ask them, what does it mean? Well, we're against globalism. I say. And I've asked this of these people. I say, okay, you just stated it again. What does it mean? We're against the globe. So it doesn't make any sense. Look at all the products around us, right, that we get from global trade. Not everything in this room was made from El Salvadoran sources by El Salvadoran people in El Salvador. If you want to live that way, you'll starve. We live in a world where we have to trade globally. If we don't trade globally, the majority of the human population would die. It's just a simple fact. But they use this anti-globalism as a weapon to mean we're for us. You understand? That somehow the enemy is everyone else. And I think that's usually a cue. When I hear someone say anti-globalism, usually it means they're promoting a kind of violent populism. and seeing all the world as the enemy in this context. And again, it tends to go with this very crude view about trade that we always lose. Whenever I trade, I'm always losing, which Trump articulates, but many others as well. And that's another cue, another sign that this is an anti-democratic populist movement. But there's another one I'm going to think about some more. That's a good question. Then one from
The final question
Zoom.
from Zoom. Yeah. Nestor says, how can populism affect a regular electoral behavior?
Let me take the case from the United States, which I've been thinking about lately. And it leads to the following, and we see this now in America. If we are the real people, we cannot lose an election. How can the people lose the election? And that's what we're seeing playing out. That in the case of American politics, Trump said, it's not possible. I could not lose. I am the people. And so when he called the Secretary of State in Georgia, who's from his own party and voted for him, a man named Brad Raffensperger, and Raffensperger said, look, we counted, and then we counted again, then we counted again, then we counted again. You lost. Trump called him. He said, it's not possible. I can't lose. He said, all I'm asking is you need to find 11,000 more votes for me. Can you imagine that? The President of the United States calling and saying, and he recorded it. It's a good thing. The Georgia Secretary of State recorded it. The President said, all I'm asking is for you to find 11,000 more votes. Shocking. Illegal. Almost unthinkable. But it's from the logic, I can't lose. And so the populist view is fundamentally, it shows up with this view, the people can never lose. And if they did lose, according to the count, it was a trick. It was a trick. And as Trump said, it was because they had Venezuelan counting machines, or the Chinese. This is just craziness, just completely crazy. But they can't accept that they would lose an election. And that's a cue that your democratic system has been infected by the coronavirus of populism. When people say, it's impossible for us to lose. The real democratic system is one in which, and by the way, I'm for limited democracy in the following sense. I don't want to have a vote on what color shirt or jacket I wear. Right? It's my jacket. I wear what I want. We don't have democracy for that. We have limited democratic choice about things that affect all the people. Right? About national defense and the judicial system and maybe some transportation issues. Those are real collective goods. We have democracy for that. We don't have democracy to tell you what church to go to, how you will worship God, what clothes you will wear, who you will marry, et cetera, et cetera. Those are not matters to be decided by a vote. You make your own decision. But for those things that we do decide by a vote, we have discussion. That the free society is a society of discussion. We talk with each other. And it means the minority today who lose the election, if they keep talking and they convince people, they might become the majority next time. That's really the important element of a free society, liberal democracy. We're in the minority now, but I'm going to talk to you and you and you and you. And maybe next time we'll be the majority. And then the previous government is out, but they become what is called the loyal opposition. And this is really important. The loyal opposition is only possible under limited government. Because if you lose the election and you're afraid, okay, now we're going to be shot or imprisoned, or we're going to lose our houses and our land and our businesses, then you make sure you don't lose the election. This is why Putin will never leave power in Russia. The only way people like him ever leave power, as they say, feet first, when you're carried out in a box. That's the only way. Why? Because he created such a powerful, violent state. If he steps aside, whoever replaces him will have him shot or imprisoned. And he knows it. So the incentive is, I can never leave office. There'll never be a free election so long as Putin is alive. Never. Same thing with Maduro. These guys cannot give up power because they set the stage. If you lose, we shoot you. So what happens? They can't lose. And that view that we want to have a loyal opposition that says, okay, we're going to be critical, but we're loyal to the Constitution. And next time, maybe we'll defeat you, and we won't punish you when you lose. That's really important. We won't punish you. And it comes, I'll end up with one thought that was asked over here a couple of times. Something that's hard to do is to not take revenge. I'll give you an example. I was in Hungary 1980s, so that was before your grandparents met, I think for many of you, so it was a long time ago. And when there was still Communist Party in charge, but the Communist Party understood this is not going anywhere. We're losing. We have to give up. And they agreed to have free elections with the democratic opposition. And there was what was called the round table meeting. And it was a very hard thing for many of my Hungarian friends. In 1956, the communists executed huge numbers of people for opposing communism. And everyone remembered it. They put 14-year-old boys in prison. And then they said, under Hungarian law, you cannot execute someone who's less than 18. So they take a 14-year-old boy, put him in prison, and he knew on his 18th birthday they took him out and shot him. That was his birthday present. And this happened. People remembered this. And some people said, when we get rid of the communists, now is our chance. Pay them back. And the democratic opposition said, we won't do that. You can keep your pension. You can keep all your medals, all your communist medals. You can keep your house. We won't do anything to you. Just let us live in peace. And they made a handshake. They had an election, and the Communist Party lost. They didn't lose 100%, by the way. They were still loyal communists. But they lost the power. And then the hard thing for the Democrats was to say, we will keep our side of the bargain. We will not punish you. We will not send anyone to prison. Nothing happened. They said, all we want is to just go forward. That's it. And just live normally. So that's the courage that defenders of freedom have to have. The courage to be willing even to forgive, which is hard. But someone a few thousand years ago preached about the importance of forgiveness, didn't he? And I think that's an important part of a free society also, to be willing to forgive. With that, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Wow.